Oh, hello and welcome everybody to our first Enneagram Community of Practice session for 2024. Wonderful to see familiar old faces and new faces, part of the family. Ingrid is presenting at the IEA conference in Egypt this weekend, so it's a rare time that she's not with us, but she'll be with us in person, in spirit. In heart. Catherine, just mute your microphone, please. We are so delighted and honored to have Cicci. I'm not even attempting the surname with us today. She'll say the surname in a moment. So just by way of a brief introduction, and I hope that Cicci will tell us a lot more about herself. Cicci comes from a background of inner growth and personal transformation. She's facilitated courses for over 20 years. She often focuses on centers, instincts, and other foundational aspects of our personhood, generally emphasizing visceral, somatic, and experiential aspects. She's written several books, including Aspects of You, about centers and drives, and The Enneagram Way, about deeper Enneagram-informed work. So, Cicci, a very warm welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to present to us today. We are delighted and can't wait to receive your teachings. And I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself a little bit more and then dive into the learning. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I think this is a great forum. I'm not a regular on the calls. I am in the group though, in the Facebook group. So I've seen some of what's going on there. And as this bio reminded me, I do come from the inner growth direction. I didn't start out doing Enneagram and then discover inner work, but rather the opposite. Because in the late 90s, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which was kind of a in the face. And from having been sort of, I'm going to start my timer. From having been interested with in inner growth or psychology in a more mindy and abstract format, I sort of started really getting into the experiential bit of it and sort of realizing that I'm going to have to actually do something here. I'm going to have to apply myself in not just the mind way, but in other ways too. And on that note, I think we could just start this whole session with doing precisely that. So we can close our eyes for a bit and find our spine in whatever chair or situation we're being right now, and just see that the spine can be reasonably straight. We don't have to sit like pitchforks, but we don't also slouch. We sort of have a worthy position, if that's relatable. And just take a couple of deeper breaths and notice how this life keeps filling up our lungs, filling up our body, our organism, quite by itself. We don't have to do anything to breathe. It's like we're being breathed. We just need to not fight it. Just need to allow this next breath into our bodies. And if we're used to doing this, just these first breaths will usually bring with them some settling inside, some relaxation, some habitual knots maybe being dissolved. And if we're not used to it, maybe we like the first few breaths and we sort of, this is nice. And then the ego goes, okay, what now? And so we can just, if that happens, we can notice that it happens, but also just go back to feeling the air entering and leaving the body quite of its own accord. It's like there's this intelligence that's so much older than me that knows how much air I need to take in. Can release it in its own time. I don't have to force anything. I can just allow this movement to happen. Allow my instinctual, biological reality to be there. And being there with it, not going away in my mind while it does this breathing thing. And when we do this, we can notice sometimes that something happens in the heart area too. Something maybe gets clearer for us, an emotion or lack of emotion, a sort of feeling climate around the chest area. We can start being aware of somatically as well as emotionally. Maybe we just experience there's a little more room around the heart for each time that we breathe in. And sometimes there are emotions quite close to the surface. Sometimes even tears may come when we just allow this to be as it is right now, this whole system, not trying to change anything or understand anything even. So maybe there are actually things right under the surface that we can just hold for a bit. Or maybe we just, we sit there, we enjoy this spaciousness. And when we do this, the mind too starts getting clearer. It's like dust can settle, or silt in water can just sort of sink to the bottom of the ocean and the water gets clearer. It can be like that with the mind. Like thoughts falling away or thoughts being more apparent. Distance between the thoughts might be more discernible. The fact that the thoughts are passing while I am the one perceiving them, and that this is not one and the same thing, might also get clearer. So with all this, or what little happened, whatever I found in this very short breathing session, I can just take another couple of deeper breaths and again in my own time, slowly open my eyes, maybe looking at something other than the screen at first, just see that I can open my eyes and still have this awareness of my breathing. And then I can come back to the screen. So my teachers on this journey, they were at first various books that I read when my interest was sort of intellectual or abstract. And then when I started like doing more sort of hardcore inner work, as I like to put it, more experiential inner work, I came across a lot of Osho therapists, because that's the channel I found at first. And then after a while, I got in touch with the Enneagram quite early on, actually. And somebody said, you know, everybody with multiple sclerosis is a 9. And I was like, I didn't know anything about the Enneagram. So I said, okay. And they told me 9s were stubborn and you know, defiant and repressed their anger. And I was like, okay, I do all that. And then when I got to know a bit more about the Enneagram, I realized that there is, as we say in Sweden, there's like degrees in hell, which means basically I was repressing my anger sometimes, but then again, not the way the 9 does, because I'm in actual fact an 8, and I'm a sexual 8, and I have a 7 wing, and there's not much 9 about it actually at all. But I didn't know this back then, so the Enneagram seemed like a cool system, and then it sort of just fell away. And then only a couple of years later, I found it again and started reading like Richard Rohr and Karen Webb, I think, before stumbling onto the wisdom of the Enneagram and sort of, oh, this is my jam. They do it the way they talk about it in the sort of structured way, and I just loved it. And so later on, I went to study with Don and Ross in the Enneagram Institute. So that is where my Enneagram schooling, if you will, is derived from. Then I've studied lots of other stuff too, but that's my base. And as the bio said, my primary interest in the Enneagram work is like the things, not that this is the 1, this is the 2, this is the 3, this is there as well, but it's about like the centers as such, the instincts as such, the levels as such, the things that we can apply to any type, the things that are same like across the board. Those appeal to me to look into. And it's been a lot of focus for me into what I call the deeper inner work, and that sounds sort of maybe pretentious. So I wanted to start by saying a bit about what I mean when I say the deeper inner work, because these words have actual connotations to them. So what I wrote when I wrote the Enneagram Way, the book, the last book, it was because I noticed some specific. Like, I just need to mute my computer because I think you can hear it. I noticed some specific like caveats coming up with. Okay, you can still hear me, yeah. Good. It's just my computer claims that you maybe couldn't. Anyway, I noticed some things that seem to trip people up doing this inner work, because around the Enneagram world, there's a lot of talk about how the Enneagram is actually for work and for doing this deeper stuff. And we talk a lot about that. But then when people start doing it, it seems like there were 3 things that came up that sort of seemed to be, tripping people up doing it. And the first one of them was understanding the realm of the ego, what the ego actually is and what it's not. The second one was understanding these inner aspects of ourselves that we talk about, the centers, the different kind of triads. The Enneagram loves triads, right? So we have all these different, and how they sometimes they were just words, and what the words meant wasn't so much focused upon. So the nature of this work, that was the second one, or the sort of the nature of these inner aspects. And then the third one was understanding like psycho-spirituality, how it's not one or the other. It's not either spirituality and enlightenment or ego and crap, but it's both, and it's the interface between them. That's kind of the Enneagram to me. And that sometimes that goes sort of falls by the wayside, and this will include what I call the deeper heart, which is a lot of in the book, and in this session we'll talk about that too, the deeper heart, what that is, and how I see that's helpful to include, as it were, in this inner work. And so these 3 realms, they're like progressively more advanced, but also, even though we're like in these spiritually anchored bits and we look at passions and stuff, then if some of the things about the ego still aren't in place, they can still trip us up. So while it's getting progressively more advanced, it's also something we need to have all these three channels on, as it were, constantly. So maybe it'll get clearer when I keep talking about it. So then, what is inner? Because we talk about inner, deeper inner work. So the inner work is like everyone knows what this is. But the thing is, we talk about it so much that we don't realize we might not always agree what we think inner work means. And in the Enneagram world, especially, if we have all these different areas of use, we use it in business, in self-improvement, in for professional inclination, for understanding and communicating with others. But when we're talking about it in the terms of inner transformation or inner growth, that's sort of a bit different. Whereas this is where the psycho-spirituality comes in again. And so the problem one that I saw there is like many people want to do this work, but they get stuck on type or discussing or analyzing instincts or, you know, object relations or whatever, and it stays on the talk and debate level. And problem number two was that inner work and inner growth doesn't really mean the same to everyone. And for a lot of people, it's like the Enneagram is a growth path. No, from where I sit, the Enneagram is not a growth path. It's just a map. And so if I sit looking at a map, that can be immensely helpful if I want to go somewhere. I will need the map, but the map itself is not going to take me anywhere. The map is an idea representing something, but it is not the something. It's just an idea or a representation. So I will need a compass maybe, or I will need, you know, a mode of transportation, like I will need both. And this will be like the compass will be my understanding of how all this fits together. And the mode of transportation will be the inner work modalities that we use here. And we're going to talk more about those as well. Because it's not types that do inner work, it's people. And while this seems like hair splitting sometimes, it's also really important, because if the type is doing the work, I'm an 8, I'm going to look at 8 work. And if I do that, I'm going to risk missing huge chunks of myself because they're not in the 8 work, because I'm not only an 8, I'm a human being. I have all kinds of things. I have all 3 centers, you know, all these things. So I need to be sort of working from me, not from my type. And not only that, but also I need to make it my work. If I do have a practice that I do, if I do transcendental meditation or A Course in Miracles, or, you know, whatever therapy I'm into, I'm going to remain a student of this unless I inhibit the work, unless I make it mine. And there, you know, there are saints who inhabited, sorry, I don't want to inhibit the work, I want to inhabit the work. And there are very like prominent, again, saints or, you know, very developed people who've been doing one thing only. But if they manage to do that to this actual blossoming of psychospirituality, then they did it from within. They didn't follow a protocol. If I just follow a protocol, I'm going to remain the student of X. And how I make it so that I don't just follow the protocol is that I see to it that it's my own experience that's guiding me, not the instructions here, but what I experience. So all that I'll go into when I talk about inner work. This is what I mean. It needs to be anchored in my actual experience. And when we talk about deeper work, for me, it's this psycho-spirituality thing. It's that we don't only do coaching or therapy and no spiritual, with no spiritual aspects like linked into it. And we don't only do the transcendental meditation or the, you know, church, whatever. We need to have both of these. That's bit one of deeper for me. The other thing that we're going to realize, and I suppose most of you already know, is just maybe we haven't said it that way, is that there is 2 kinds of inner work that we engage in. One is scheduled and one is spontaneous. And the scheduled inner work would be when I sit down every Tuesday night doing this meditation, or I go to this group, or I go to therapy, or I go, whatever I do. And the fact that I call it scheduled doesn't mean that it has to be scheduled in the calendar, but it's something I do with a certain format, and I follow a certain routine. And most of us will start there because that's how we come into this. Not everyone, but most of us. And then there is spontaneous work, which happens when I start applying whatever I learned, or I come to do this automatically as I go along. So I'm at work and something happens, and I don't have to save this up for my therapy session, but I can actually, when I get a minute, I can go to the loo and I can sit down and I can breathe and I can do this thing, whatever it is. So that would be the spontaneous work, and it's like gradually it goes to being life. And I do this on the fly. I do this in my life, and it's not a big thing necessarily. It's just reflections and experiences that happen while I'm living. And to me, it seems like this deeper work, it needs to always be second nature to us. I can't do real deeper work if it's just about going and doing the thing. It needs to be integrated within me. So that much said about inner and deeper and what I sort of think that they entail. So for the first part of this, the first part in the book, The Enneagram Way, actually, and the first part of what I talked about before, the ego realm, I think what we want to do is we want to truly show up, and we want to allow what is, because if we resist what is, then we're not going to be able to go forward. So that's, and the ego will stand in the way of that. And it will stand in the way of it in like 3 ways usually. And it's like we need to understand the nature of the ego, because if we don't, it's going to trip us up. And we need to understand the role of the ego, because if we don't, again, it's going to trip us up. And also, we need to understand how we attempt to micromanage our growth and how to stop doing that. Because usually it goes on, regardless of which type we belong to. It's just something that seems to be human and egoic, because the ego likes control. We'll see that. So as for the nature of the ego, there's like, we come into this life as bundles of essence, basically. And then we're plonked down in a body, and we have this temperament to go with it. And the ego starts taking shape as we grow up. And it's not a mistake. We're meant to do that. If you grow up and don't have an ego development, you're going to be in an asylum somewhere. So this is part of the of the curriculum for a human being, is to develop an ego. And what the mistake that we can make sometimes is that every church or whatever we might have come across might have tried to make us believe is that this is, if not a mistake, then at least something we should grow out of. And that it's like we can be concerned with ultimate being or essence or whatever we like to call it, or God, or we can be concerned with ego. And it's like, this is not quite correct, because the ultimate being will include the ego. Because either we can say the ego is just a fantasy anyway, so or it's not a fantasy and it's a thing, and the ultimate being will include everything. So it's not like it's not a contest. It's not essence on one hand and ego on the other hand. It's just the ego is just an idea in all of this. And I think you can say the ego is made up of the experience of loss and fear. Because we're in the womb, everything is dandy and everything is one, and what I need comes to me. And then I get out and they slap me on the bum, and sort of suddenly what I need does not necessarily come to me immediately anymore. And so I start fearing stuff. I start, trying to get what I need, that this struggle begins. And I start realizing that, okay, I'm not the same. They're different from me. And this takes a few years, but when we come to that, we realize that this is not me. And so while all this is going on, we lose this connection with this pure essence that we came with. And since like essence is a bit like the sun shining on water, it's not everybody is going to, sorry, a person is not going to be like essence. A person is going to reflect one glitter of it. It's like we can't harbor all of this in a human person. So we sort of have these essential qualities, and I'm sure you know of them, that different types have different flavors, as you should probably know. So this loss of connection with essence will lead to heart wounds if you study Ross Hudson, or the passions, the fixations, the scrambling of the centers. Everything starts there. And again, it's no mistake. It's like the ego is like a costume, and we need this costume. The goal is not to disrobe and sort of walk around as naked, as naked essence, but actually. Shut my phone up. I thought I did that. Thank you. But actually to just disidentify, to not believe that this is me, this is who I am. And the ego is actually likely to be, we're coming to the ego's role here, because the ego is likely to be the first reason I go into inner growth. Because it's like we see that you're supposed to be this way, or look, there's peace there to be had, possibly, or love, or freedom, or whatever it is I'm looking for. And that would be the ego, most likely, and that's fine. Now, there's a Sufi story in the beginning of the wisdom of the Enneagram. I think Sandra Maitri has it as well in the spiritual dimension of the Enneagram. And they talk about a locksmith that was erroneously imprisoned for something he didn't do. And his wife presented him with a prayer mat so he could pray in prison. And when he'd been doing that for quite some time, he realized that on this mat, there was the design of the lock that held him in this prison was on the mat. So he struck a deal with the prison guards to bring him materials, and he made stuff for them to sell and profit off. And also he made a key for the lock, and then he subsequently escaped. And I think this story is lovely because it's, for all the obvious reasons, like Sufi parables tend to have these, this is how we're imprisoned, and we just need to meditate basically, or pray, and we'll find the way out. But also we need to befriend the prison guards. He didn't fight the prison guards, and this is like key, because so many of these so many of the teachings that we can come across will have us fight the ego. And the only one that gets off on that is the ego. So that's going to keep us in a constant loop, which is ineffective and painful. So that's, and it's just to be aware of, we're sort of, in a way, we're trained to think like that. And we can see when the ego's at the wheel, so to speak, when we do this inner work and we expect arrival will mean complete freedom from problems. And maybe we realize after some time that what I thought was a problem wasn't really, was a gift, or vice versa even. So we don't always know what's a problem or not, but we have these like rosy, or the ego has these rosy ideas about what arriving will look like. It might also like hold up easy checklists for outer signs of growth that we should. These are, when I have these, I'm evolved. They don't have it, so they're not evolved, or I don't have it, so I'm not evolved. And we have these sort of checklists, which are also a bit egoic. Or we try to grow from the head alone. Again, we and not only the head, but also the simple constructive function of the head. If you read Aspects of You, I'm talking about the two aspects of the head. One is like this thinking, calculating bit, and the other one is the being open bit. And we try and grow from understanding. It's like we read enough books and I get this in place, because that's how we used to do it. But we can't just grow from the head. We need to grow from all the centers, because knowing ourselves, that Socrates, I think, said, know thyself. It's not knowing in the mind, but it's knowing. You know, talk about having carnal knowledge of people. That does not mean you think about them or know stuff about them. That, yeah. So there's another kind of knowing that he was talking about. And this knowing is experiential, is not theoretical. So we cannot substitute intellectual understanding for experience. That doesn't work. But we often prefer doing that or trying to do that, since this experience is quite often unpredictable and uncomfortable or even painful. So there's that. And I put to all of these, I thought I'd have a sort of sum up practice for this bit of it. And I'd say the sum up practice for this bit of the ego, the nature of the ego, will just be to gently watch your ego expectations. What do you believe will happen when you manage to do your meditation perfectly? What do you believe will happen when you process this bit about your childhood or whatever? And do not judge what you find. Because even if you've been doing this for years, we're likely to have these, these sort of innocent expectations that maybe finally I can get, I can get a gold star, or I can get to rest. And so we don't need to judge them or anything. We just need to notice. It's like the ego is like a small child, and the child says, "I don't want to go in the bathtub. What if a crocodile comes through the tap?" And you're like, "Okay, that's not going to happen." But the child doesn't know that. And hopefully, if you're a good parent, you will take the child seriously, not to say, "Okay, so you don't have to have the bath," but you will take their fear seriously. And it's like that with the ego. We can listen to what it has to say. I really believed I would get this when I did that. That's fine. But we don't have to let it steer the ship. It's just that we tend to do one or the other. Either we let it steer the ship and the ego gets to call all the shots, or we sort of try and brush it off, which doesn't really work. So when it comes to the role of the ego, or the ego personality in inner work, it's like when we look in the Enneagram world, there are tons of exercises. This is an exercise for ones, this is an exercise for twos, and stuff like that. And they're great in like finding your type and in learning about your type. Then it's perfect, and we can be pointed in the right direction for good growth material for us. Because if I'm an 8 and I'm looking at the 4's growth material, or sort of the exercise for the 4, I might be, "Oh, I'm so evolved. This is not a problem to me." Of course, not a problem to me. You're an 8. It wouldn't be a problem. So we can really benefit from looking at what I'm supposed to, the problems I'm supposed to have. And if I have none of my problems, by the way, that my type is supposed to have, then maybe I'm not that type. So that's fairly good in the beginning. And once we're learning how to do this, then sort of letting go of the information and the typology of it and the grouping and everything. And we just need to do our experiential work, what comes up within me, whether it's 4-ish or 5-ish or 9-ish or 8-ish or whatever. I can explore it. And this step, the actual experiential work, is quite often missed, because we do the first bit. We identify our type and we look at the specific things that go with our type. We can do that for decades and not run out. So there's that. But we also need to let go of that and go into the experience and let whatever the experiences we have in life, the situations we get into, and let that guide us. And when we've done this experiential work, and it's not like once and never again, it's like constantly we do these things. But when we've experienced something, we really like had this epiphany maybe, or just started suspecting that maybe there's actually love for me or whatever, maybe when we're starting to do this experientially, things might start falling into place then again, the head is very good. The personality is very good. We can recognize what's happened. We can utilize the information we learned. And that's perfect. But that's not the same as learning about features and then going looking for them. So we need to sort of let go of this and just have this open experiential space in between. And then we can sort of go back to the mental understanding again and see what it actually was that we understood. So the head is a good frame in this work. The sort of ego personality can frame the work. And I'm not saying the head and the ego is the same, by the way. I realized it sounded like that. But we need to have we need to let go of the steering, the safety wheels or whatever, and just have this experience in between. And you very often, I think people find a type, they do the exercises, they understand, they can read about their type and say, wow, this is me. I really, ouch. I really can see that this is me. And then I start drawing the conclusions from that, which is okay and possibly useful, but I miss experiencing how this is for me, what happens. So working on type, working from type, basically it's helpful in the beginning and for developing strategies. And sometimes we need strategies. There's nothing wrong with strategies. We just need to realize that depth is not defined by the activity that we do, but by the quality of awareness that we bring into it. So if I'm allowing this experience of my object relation or whatever it is, that's something entirely different from reading about it and understanding it intellectually. And I think the sum up practice here might be to notice, how am I with these different steps? Like when I encounter something new, a new theory, like Enneagram theory, or an aspect of it that I haven't like sunk my teeth into before, what happens? Do I love to learn about it? Do I actually let go of this theory and see how this is for me? Or do I directly jump to the last step and try and draw conclusions and make changes from my intellectual understanding? And we can sort of just notice where we seem to put the most energy. And so the third bit about the ego was this part about micromanaging our own growth, which is likely to happen. It's an ego speciality. And again, we were small children, we relied on mom and dad, and then we were meant to learn to sort of respond to what came to us in a sort of balanced and integrated way. That's theoretically what we're meant to learn, but we couldn't learn that because our parents couldn't teach us because they didn't know how. So instead of learning how to respond from the truth of this moment, I learned two things as a child. I learned to mimic the adult's reasoning, which I'm not yet capable of. I'm not yet capable of that kind of reasoning myself, but I can copy what they say. This is right, this is wrong. And then gradually I come to rely more and more on my ego and my superego, which is not ideal, but again, which is what happens to most, I would say all of us. So I think this comes from, or I mean, we just, let's say, we just do this. It seems to be, again, in the human curriculum. But the thing is, we cannot, we believe, like we went to school and we learned stuff, we collected information, we draw conclusions, and then we implemented something, and that was that. That we changed something, we learned something. This doesn't work for inner growth. We can't do change. We can only do work that allows change. But it's tricky because there is the change through willpower bit, and there is transformation through awareness. And these are not the same thing. It's like awareness is not knowing and thinking about something, it's experiencing against something. So if I have a puppy and the puppy is chewing my shoes because it's growing teeth, I can put the shoes on the shelf. The puppy can't reach them, problem solved. But I haven't changed the puppy. The puppy is not transformed. It will be when the teeth grew in, but but I solve the situation with like willpower change, which is fine. It's very efficient. If I have a problem with alcohol, maybe I can solve it by refraining from buying alcohol and I don't have the problem. Hooray, that's perfect. Let's do that. But I don't solve the problem of having a problem with alcohol. I just change the circumstances, which is, again, great. But we need to see the difference between solving problems with the willpower way and solving them with awareness and allowing this transformation to happen, which is generally more painful, takes longer, more uncomfortable. Yeah, general. So we need just to see again which am I doing. And I think here the summer practice for the ego would be like recognizing this warrior stance, and it's not always violent. I'm an 8, so it's like warrior stance, but it might be just putting up lists and decrees for myself to follow, and with all the best intentions, but just notice when this actually creates an inner fight. And then we might notice how this is actually grasping for control when we try and make ourselves change and be the nice people we want to be, or whatever people we want to be. That's a way for us to try and have control. And it's not bad, it's just not very helpful. So just gently check, maybe sometimes, if you're attempting to get deeper transformation through applying willpower, because it might be the case. I know it's been for me a lot of the time. Yeah, just looking at the time. Yeah. So this inner growth thing, these inner aspects that we have in the nature of the work, which I said was like the second, sorry, the second arena where we get tripped up. Is that why we so often avoid the experiential and go into theory? It's because it's uncomfortable. I've seen it mentioned in the community of practice group on Facebook, actually, as OCV moments, like ouch, cringe, vomit. Can't remember the mother, I think, of this expression, but it's really pertinent because it's like all these things, the troublesome behaviors that we have, the patterns that we follow, the reactivity that shows up, all of that is just that we learned to do these things so as not to feel this discomfort or the charge, I like to call it. It's like something builds up and we need to get rid of this charge. So we do something, or we slam the door and walk away, or we make a list, or we do whatever. We avoid this discomfort by talking and intellectualizing, maybe like head flavored escape, or we might be like smashing stuff, which would be a gut flavored escape, or we might be going over the same emotional baggage over and over again and sort of processing or crying over something, but not really feeling what's underneath that, which would be a heart flavored escape. So we can actually escape feelings by feeling. It's the ego is very creative. And I think the solution to all these forms of resistance to discomfort from learning things about ourselves is befriending the felt sense, or befriending anything that takes us out of the above strategies, the talking or the smashing things or the whatever. But usually the felt sense will be involved in that because it takes us to the truth of our moment. It takes us out of the story, out of the mind or the ideas that we have about this moment and into the actual moment, which helps us stay with the process. So this will be a very, very important bit at first in these contexts where we try and go into the experience of things, do inner work. We will need to learn how to stay with it, which is also the first step would be we need to notice evasion. We need to notice how we try not to stay with it. And when we notice, we need to be gentle with ourselves. That's a really big bit in all of this, all the time. That's going to be key. And And if we want to do this as an Enneagram informed exploration, because that's why most of us are here, because we love the Enneagram and we like to use that for growth, there's tons of triads and groupings and stuff in the Enneagram that will help us do experiential work, actually. And paradoxically, regardless of type, explorations tend to start from the head because we read it in books. That's how most of us got in touch with the Enneagram. We read books, we went to a workshop, whatever, and we were taught about it. So we recognize stuff that, oh, that's me. We think back in our lives, we sort of reflect on things, we incorporate things into our self-image, or we protest against because we don't want to incorporate it into our self-image. And since the head center will be paramount to anything worthy of being called study, it's quite reasonable that the head center will be where understanding begins, which is fine. It's a very good way to start, and not only in the beginning at the actual start, but whenever we're sort of starting again, or whenever we're venturing into new territory. And there are very good, like Ennea territories for exploration again in these triads. We have the centers, we have the social styles or the Hornivian groups, like assertive, compliant, or duty, or withdrawn. We have like conflict styles, or what Don Riso called the harmonic groups, which would be like positive outlook, or not being negative. And the other two would be emotional realness or reactivity, or wherever, depending on which decade we learned this, or
Rational competency.
Competency, like again, writing a list. We have all kinds of ways of handling conflicts. So any grouping that we can see in ourselves, that we can identify experientially, but there's my gut center, there's my assertiveness going again, that whatever it is, any such grouping is very good to use as a kind of springboard for sort of scheduled work on this when we want to look at stuff. And what we might realize is that we can go into object relations or instincts or whatever, and they would be like more advanced. Social styles or reactive, conflict styles would be simpler. We might think about any of these features, and that just the last few months or weeks or whatever, and we can like take inventory of if and how it's been playing out in our lives, the consequences it's had on our interactions with others, how it affects our mindset, what beliefs or patterns it sort of tends to feed within us, how this particular group belonging might let me off the hook, provide excuses for me, whatever it might be. And so you might notice all of these questions would be for the head. And again, it's a terrific place to start, but we don't have to stay there. That's barely beginning, but it's less threatening for the ego, so we can often start looking at that way. We can read about it in the book, we can see, yeah, I see that this applies to me, and I can think back and I can reflect and I can do a mental sort of take inventory of this. But if I really want to work on it experientially, it's going to be more about like calling forth the situation within myself, really, not just thinking back on it, but sort of placing myself there, remembering the smell in the kitchen, seeing who was there, or at work or whatever it is, and sort of just put myself in the same situation again. And then I can start exploring like, what are the sensory qualities of this experience? Where in my body do I sense this impulse or this feeling? Like, how does this manifest? And this is like stepping away from cognitive reflection only and into an experience. And when we do that, it's very important to realize it's about noticing, it's not about answering. So the search for, how does this feel? Where is this? Oh, I feel it in my gut. It's like a knot, whatever. This looking or sensing or whatever is going to be the important thing. The words we put on it are not the important thing. They are if we're going to communicate them to our coach or therapist, but they're not the main thing. The main thing is to sort of explore it experientially again. So what we might want to do is like we practice not going into the story. We practice staying in the body, staying in whatever situation we're in, either physically, practically in this moment, or if I'm just thinking back to it, I can sort of stay in that situation, but being there. And this is where this charge might potentially come in. So we need to tread lightly, and we need to remember that pushing does not work. So, because that would be the ego going undercover. So in the beginning, again, this is likely going to be scheduled work. We can take this to our practice. We can practice staying in the thing, the experience, not going into the story. And then eventually, if we do that, if we practice that, we're going to notice that we start doing these, start using any techniques or a thing that we learned, to strategies that we learned, we start using them on the fly to sort of, oh, this is actually that. And we can afford to do some of this work as we go along, which is kind of cool, actually. And any kind of work, any kind of experiential work that we do, or any work, I'd say, is going to be concerned with how it's going to be about the centers expressing themselves. It's going to always involve the three centers of intelligence. So while we can look at them as groups and see how is my gut doing, how's my heart doing, etc., and we can do exercises with that, we also need to realize that the centers aren't just an Enneagram grouping. The centers are us. They're what we live from in this body, in this existence. So, and we all have them. That's another thing. It's not, I'm over-identified as an 8 with the gut center or the instinctual center, but it's not that the 2 doesn't have an instinctual center or the 5. We all have them. We all have the instincts, for one thing, but we also all have all the things that go with the instinctual center, like resistance or control or boundaries or agency, moving, doing, initiative, the need for anatomy, anger, separateness, immediacy, the I am here quality. Everybody has that. We might like being in it, or we might not like it so much. We might be afraid of it. We can have all kinds of responses to it, but it's going to be there. And it's the same with the heart. It's like, we're going to have a self-image. Everybody has a self-image. That's, again, part of the ego. We have what I call it, a me who. We need mirroring. We have emotions. There's resonance things. There's relationships in my life. Love, shame, receptivity, all that kind of things that we say, these are heart matters. And this would be, I think, the who am I bit of me. And also the head center. Again, we all have one. This is maybe not as strange to people because we're in a very, most of us, this Western world is very head-centered. But it's like we all have understanding, we all worry, we have projections, we can memorize stuff, we imagine stuff, we calculate, we use abstraction, and there's also this higher aspect of the mind, which would be the like emptiness, the stillness, direct knowing, that kind of thing. So if the heart is the who am I, then this is possibly the where am I. It's like orienting myself in the world and in my understanding. So which center triad we belong to in the Enneagram, if we're a gut type or a heart type or a head type, that would just be, this is not mirrored, so I did them wrong, but anyway, that would just be my ego's overinvestment, what I identify with. But we all have everything. We all have grounding. We all have resonance. We all have understanding. And we need to have them because that's again, a human thing. And they also, in a way, have this working order that I just mentioned. They have grounding, they have resonance, or the gut is grounding, the heart is resonance, and the head is understanding. And this order makes sense in the way that for words and concepts to matter, which is a head thing, I need to first be a real feeling human, which is a heart thing. And to be that, I need to know that I'm here in the first place, which would be a gut thing. Or put another way, unless I'm grounded, emotional work is going to be pointless because I'm going to be going round and round in it. And if I'm not in touch with myself, the me who, like the heart center, which we just saw requires my gut to be online, then my cognition and my thoughts will be modeled by like unprocessed or disowned instinctual or emotional material. And I'll likely not recognize this because, again, I'm locked like in the head. So this needs to be online in this particular order. This is a huge topic. I run entire courses on this theme alone. So it's a lot. But there is also here a however. And the however will be there are some differences in the way we relate to the centers. In that we might have a preferred intelligence. It's very likely that we have one. We might have a neglected intelligence. And we might have, we all have different centers that are relevant for different issues that we have. So if we look at the first perspective, the preferred intelligence, often, but not always, this will be my center. If I'm an 8, it's going to be, the gut, etc. But if I'm a primary type in a triangle, it's not necessarily my experience. And it doesn't really matter, but we're going to have one that we sort of might get stuck on or prefer to do first for each center. And this does not negate that everything starts with the gut. We just said that's another plane of truth. So there's like multiple truths here. So we might have this preferred intelligence. And we might also have the need to address blindness. And blindness is a funny word because nothing is not there, nothing is missing. And blind, by the way, doesn't mean missing. It just means we can't see it and it's there, but we can't perceive it, which is exactly what this is talking about. But sometimes this is what's holding us back. If I'm a 5 and I'm not like owning my body, I'm not owning my agency, my physical self, this might be a problem for me. I might prepare for all eternity and never get to do what I want to do. It's a very simple example, but one. So that's the second thing we might want to look into. What am I sort of negating? What am I not addressing? What do I prefer to leave out? And obviously the third perspective, that we have a center that's relevant for a particular issue. And if I'm not addressing that, I can try and address this issue forever and I won't get anywhere. So if I have an issue about, say no, or like choosing for myself, that will be a gut thing. And I can cry about it for ages and nothing will change. And maybe I have an obvious loss. It's like a very clear heart thing. But also it might be an instinctual thing. I have a friend who got divorced, or her husband divorced her, and she was very sad, obviously. And it took months before she realized her social instinct was like gutted, basically. She was like, I'm going to die. I'm losing my little clan here, my family. And so the gut needed to be addressed as well. Also, the head needed to be addressed. I mean, lots of issues, most issues will have aspects from all 3 centers. It's just that we might not like to address particularly one of them, and we might be very fond of addressing one of them. And so we kind of get stuck in modalities that we feel are very helpful and work so well for me, but they also allow me the free pass to stay out of where I don't really like to go. So we need to understand the centers unrelated to type. We need to understand what the gut is, what the heart is, what the head is. And we need to heed this understanding in the ways that I just talked about. And when we do, we can sort of work with growth without tripping ourselves up or unwittingly attempting to bypass stuff without really knowing it. And I think the sum up practice would be really looking at your relationship to the centers. How are you relating to the instinctual, to the emotional, to the cognitive center, respectively? And I think we can actually take a break. We can make a little exercise out of this, take some inventory. So we can have groups of 2, and the format for the exercise is what I call thinking out loud or talk research. which is basically A, talks and B, listens. And I mean, if you don't hear them, you can say, sorry, what? But otherwise, just keep your mouth shut and be there and let the person talk. And A, you can talk about which center do you most readily engage? Where does your ego like to go? What do you like hanging out? Question number 2, what do you still avoid there in that same center? Question number 3, which center might you be forced to include if you included that, what you just said that you avoided? And this can be either in general or in a specific scenario that's been showing up lately. So to example, if I'm an 8, I am an 8, and it's really easy for me to see I overuse the gut. It's like I exerting my agency, believing that this will have enough impact to change things according to my preferences. So I like to do stuff and jump into action. That's would be the answer to which center do I like to engage, or my ego likes to engage. So the second question, what am I avoiding in this same center? And that to me would be, I can feel that I still avoid the basic felt sense, that like identification, the background of the doing, as it were, because I want to do stuff and I want to address stuff. But what is it that makes me? This is the charge again, right? So for me, that would be the more basic experience of that center is what I'm avoiding. And that's likely to be the case for everybody, but see what that entails for you. And for me, it would be like, if I were to include this in my experience, I'd risk feeling helpless or small. And there would be shame there, because my self-image is not helpless and small. My self-image is capable and strong. So this is not what I want to experience. Which, question number 3, which center does this threaten to put me in touch with? And obviously that would be my heart. So you see, do you sort of follow the idea? Let's just look at, where do you like to go to feel constructive and address stuff? And what are you still avoiding in that same center? And what center would you have to look closer at if you didn't avoid that second thing? Is that, anyone not get what I'm talking about? And you don't have to do this according to type. Do it according to your experience, especially if you're a primary type. It's not likely even that you go to will be your home center. So just see what tends to be your favorite MO, or your ego's favorite MO. Okay?
Cicci, I'm typing the instructions in the chat, so I just want to be clear that I've typed them correctly.
No, because I didn't want you to hear my computer, so I shut off my sound.
Oh,
So
can you hear me now?
yeah.
Okay. Stephen, I see your message. So I'm typing the instructions in the chat just for clarity for everybody. So I just want to check that what I'm typing is correct. So it's going to be in pairs. A talks to B just listens. So question 1, which center do you most readily engage? 2, what do you still avoid in that center? And 3, which center might you be forced to include if you get engaged that part? Is that any editing necessary there?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. How long should we make the breakout groups?
Make them 10 minutes. And I
Okay.
apologize for the time being a bit short, but
That's okay. All right. So
and in 10 minutes, you need to both do it. So you need to swap, you need to keep the time.
yeah. Okay, so 10 minutes, and then it'll be 60 seconds to come back after the 10 minutes. If for any reason you find yourself alone in your breakout room, or your partner's not, online, just leave. In fact, just call me and then I'll assign somebody else to you. All right, let's have a look. Great, we're going to, all right, I need to move somebody so that there's a group. Hang on. Move to 4. Okay. All right. Okay. If you ask to not be in a room and you find yourself in one, please just leave because I'm not able to exclude for some other reason. So, all right, we're going to break out in 3, 2, 1. Have fun. Okay. To move her. Oh, okay, she's moved. Okay, that's everybody. All right, I think Natasha doesn't have access to a camera and is probably busy or I don't know what, and Stephen asked to not join the room. So that's fine.
And I'm over time in my plan.
Yes, great. Okay. I think that the exercises are great. It's wonderful to land these things and have experiential practices. So yeah.
It's just they're bulky time-wise. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking from the being overtime perspective, I would actually like to go on afterwards. But I don't know if I don't think I've ever done that. I've always had a debrief and sort of check in that people are okay. So how
So are you saying after the breakout to do a debrief?
well, I would prefer not to, since I'm really I'm sort of going to be squashed for time.
Oh, okay.
I just sort of waver a bit because I feel it might be sort of just irresponsible to send people into breakout rooms and say talk about this and then just
And not debrief. Yeah. Yeah, maybe you can just do a brief debrief.
Yeah, I can just
Say I'll take
exactly.
2 comments or something, and I think you can be upfront, that there's still lots of room to cover, lots of ground to cover in the talk, and less than an hour left, so we'll just take a few comments coming out of the debrief.
So when I emailed with you and Ingrid, you had different takes on this because I think she said you have 90 minutes. You said you have 2 hours. So can
It's
I?
2 hours.
Okay, so I can. You don't have to do something after I finish and still be ready, still be finished before 5. So I can go until 6 for you. Anyway, I can go to the top of the hour.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's still 50 minutes. You can go to the top of the hour. Yeah.
That's perfect. Then we can have a debrief. Then it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a 2-hour session, and people know that.
Yeah. I just since you said that, and then Ingrid said you have 90 minutes, I just figured that, quarter before. That's very clever, actually, with the recording paused thing, because I tended to stop the recording to not have a giant recording when people went into groups. But then again, I stopped it, so I had to remember to start it again because there was no red thing telling me that I stopped it, which meant sometimes you forgot. Anyway, I'm thinking we leave some space for anything that wants to be add or shared or said from the exercise. Anything that was, surprising or entertaining or disappointing or whatever that you want to share.
For Hilda and I, we both found the second question difficult.
Did you have the same center that you like to engage in?
We did, yes. We the head.
Okay.
And so just what came up for us as a way to respond to the second question is, so then what we avoid is the heart and the gut. And, we kind of drew our conclusions in that way, which was very insightful and helpful. But yes, that second question was difficult. I don't know if you could expand a bit more on it.
Yes, I would, without knowing you at all, obviously, and either of you, I would, if I look at when I overindulge in the head, which has been known to happen on occasion, I can see that what I avoid about the head would be what previously I called the higher open function of the head. The bit I would go and engage in the thinking and the planning and the everything, but I would possibly avoid the open present. Yeah. It looks like you're. This is telling you something. Yeah.
Yes, get it, totally. I felt something, I said something similar. It's like I don't allow coolness to happen in my thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about this exercise, which just it's this is the first time I do it in this format, it just came to me that this is an interesting way of getting to what you suppress or what you neglect, because formerly we've been looking at I overindulge in this and I sort of underindulge in this, or I suppress or neglect this, but it just came to me today that the reason or a way into what I'm neglecting might be some of the qualities about my favorite center that I'm not so fond of. So that was why this question was stuck in there in the middle. Thank you for raising that. Anyone else? Yes.
Go.
What I found strange really was that both Marissa and myself, who are really heart-centered types, chose head center as the center that we access first, or that we most readily engage. I don't really understand why, because surely that's not the preferred, or the preferred center for either of us, and yet it that's what both of us said.
What types are you?
Marissa said she's 2 and I'm 4.
Yeah, okay, that was my guess. I would say, I think if we spoke to everyone on the face of the earth and gave them this question, the most popular center for overindulging would be the head, or at least if we speak to everyone in the Western world and this sort of civilized world or whatever, because we do that. We're sort of trained. We get it with the mother's milk, basically, that we should rationalize and we should think and we should explain and we should. That's the whole educational system is built upon that. So I'd say that's one reason. In your case, as a 4, that's also the reason that 4s tend to sort of scramble this heart energy with head energy and sort of feed heart energy with head energy. So it's like use imagination and thinking and stuff to sort of keep this heart thing going while neglecting your physical presence and agency and stuff. I mean, that would be the schematic way of putting it. But I'd say, yeah, so it's not necessarily surprising. Everybody, the 2 has likely been sort of trained by the world that whatever you want to get people to do or persuade them into, you're going to have to put up a good pitch for it. So yeah, I'd say it's not very strange, and that's why I said it's not that it goes by the model necessarily. So it's more productive to look at what do I do, and then again, maybe use the head or sort of the understanding and the teaching to see how does this actually fit in? This is strange, like you just did. So thanks. It's interesting to hear these things. Yes, Xante, is that right?
Xanthi. Yeah, close. Thanks. Yeah, I was going to say it was a very, very difficult question to understand. But as soon as now that we've come back and you've used the term indulgence, you know what center is, it now makes so much more sense as soon as you what you meant. So yeah, also head center and obviously direct definitely always going to be my go-to as well. But yeah, no, the second question was tough. But so overindulgence is the key word to make a sentence work.
Yeah, it's funny how much difference, you know, you try and put these things in 5 different ways because words do mean a lot because we have different spins on them and different ways to hear them. Yeah. So we'll have, if there is one more, we'll have one more and then we'll go on. And the silence descended. So I'll go on then.
Oh, sorry, Cicci, if you don't mind, I just have one more question.
Yeah.
You were saying that sometimes the heart pulls into the head to feed the head, to feed the heart. You saying that obviously is not the reverse as well, hey?
Well,
Because
if you're a 5, you will use lots of heart to fuel the head. So that would be like the 4 in reverse. So, and I mean, again, we can all do these in minor ways, but from the model, if we do it that way, that would be, and the 1 would use the heart to feed. It's like, this is right and it's in my gut, but I'll use my heart as a 1 to sort of convince you possibly, but also to sort of justify my own, course.
yeah, I've actually seen that in my daughter. I also think she's a 1, but it comes with a whole lot of emotion.
Yeah,
it's super interesting. Thanks.
it's like if you're a 7, you'll use the gut to feed the head, which might be sometimes running over into spontaneity or what we might call impulsivity. So there's all kinds of ways to scramble these whole teachings on that too.
Thanks.
Cicci, can you say a little bit more about how the 5 uses the heart? I understand that if it's not a 3, 6, or 9, the types for the scrambling are outsourcing to the adjacent center.
Yeah.
So 8 outsourcing to 7, 7's outsourcing to 8, 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And then and on the edges of the centers, 4's outsourcing to the head, 5's outsourcing to the heart. So, but I'm curious how 5's use the heart center.
I think if we want to have it, if we want to make it really accessible, just for the sake of teaching here, you can think of sexual 5, which would be this like a bit more juicy kind of. You can see how feelings get drawn into it. You have a mental thing. I have my world. My 5 friends, she used to design worlds physically. She had like little globes and she had clay and she made forms that were countries and she sort of made her own little worlds. And she would, a lot of them, that would be sort of a safe outlet for emotion. So not to have the emotions come into the relationships maybe, but she could sort of have that as a, and she's not a sexual 5 by the way, far from it, but there's this, you see a bit what this might look like. You still look a bit,
Yeah, I'm not
unhappy.
entirely certain.
Sorry?
I'm not entirely certain. So
Okay.
understand that, yeah, I understand how fours do it. Understand how fours like think about their feelings and go into the head, into fantasy.
Well, a 5 going into the head, can you not see how they will feel about their thinkings? They will feel about their thoughts. That's sort of where they live. This is where I project my maybe.
Okay, feel about their thoughts is helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So again, this is another whole teaching that I've been having and exploring. I'm actually writing another book where this will come in. So I'll send you a copy when it's finished. So we've been talking about the ego. We've been talking about the inner work, the sort of different ways we can use all these different aspects of ourselves to go into these experiential areas. So now, how does all this become psycho-spirituality? How do we engage the deeper heart? How do we make this both about spirit and about, humanhood, or actually animalhood? And we know that when we talk about type, we know we can hear type descriptions beautifully put together, and usually that's how types are taught. But we also hopefully get told that it's not this description, that is not the 3. It's the why, it's the motivation, not the action. Yeah. So we hear that all the time. But the thing is, this is just half true, because even deeper than this motivation, it's actually about that which the motivations themselves are arising out of. And here we will be sort of feeling into the psychology, sort of the spiritual realm. It's like if we have a 2, for example, we know that personality type 2 is the helper, or that it's a very giving person. And at the very least, whatever we call type 2, we know it's about generosity, it's about being needed, it's about bringing value to others. And also, we learn that this is expressed in behaviors like wanting to know stuff maybe about people and be close to them, or occupying key behind the scenes positions, and sometimes maybe being a bit of a meddler. We have all these descriptions of how this might play out. And we also know that, no, of course, this is not everyone will not look the same. It's just that all this in the description, it points to something. And this something is like the motivation. And regardless of description, we realize that the common motivation is to, like, what for the 2 is going to be show love and be loved. And if we have a decent, a teaching and a decent description of the 2, this will explain a lot about the 2. And we can note that all this is in the realm of psychology. But then we might wonder, why does a 2 feel that they can only be redeemed through loving others well? Why is that the case? Or we can step inside the 2 and can ask, why doesn't everyone feel this is the case? Isn't this obvious? And from the Enneagram's perspective, the response would be like, essence, passions, heart wounds. That is the spiritual realm. These are the underlying causes for the motivations that cause the behaviors, if you will. But the usual problem will be that, as I said in the beginning, ego work, like therapy or coaching, and spiritual work, they will be separate. So we might go to our therapist and we might work on our childhood wounds, and we'll go to our coach and figure out how to handle the situation at work. And then we might go to our chaplain or, meditation teacher or whatever, and do our spiritual bit. And we have the 2 covered, or so it feels. But the thing is, there's quite an abyss between these 2. It's like a big jump from intellectual abstraction into the psychological realm, from ego and concrete handlings and into God, basically. It's hard to bridge these if we don't use this, again, experiential exploration of, among other things, these different Enneagram components. Because we have all these keywords and descriptions of social styles, of object relations, of passions, of fixations, of whatever it is, but they only point to something. And we can hear, somebody might ask, what are the passions? And they get a list of words in response. It's not a good answer to that question. Maybe that's what they were looking for, but if they weren't, they're going to be very disappointed, because this doesn't tell me anything about what passions are. What is this? And to realize this, we can again start in the head, and we can learn and study, but we can also to truly have this integrated learning or actual knowledge, not just a sort of something we can repeat and memorize. We need to experience this something that the words and the keywords and the lists that they're pointing to. And here the good clusters of groups, either in like lighter, in the beginning, we can look at Hornidian groups. We can start doing that from a very heady perspective and still get lots out of it. You can see it, oh, they're very assertive and withdrawn. That's why we keep having this issue come up, or whatever. And we can look at the centers of intelligence. Again, we can look at object relations. And the sum up here would be to practice looking beneath the keywords all the time. What does this mean? What does this mean practically to me when I'm in this experience? And if I'm an 8, I might say, okay, so I tend to assert myself. I can see that. But how does this manifest within me? Not what do I do, but what happens to make me do this? How does that feel? Or if I'm a 6 and I can see, I learn about object relations and I realize I'm in the attachment triad. So I can draw lots of conclusions with my mind, but also, what does that mean? What does being in the attachment triad mean to me, not as an abstract concept, but for me personally in this moment? And so when I start doing that, when I start sort of learning about the types, learning about this system from this very integrated direction, not just learning it as a list or again, a whole speech, but as an experience. What does this feel like? Then something will change. And what will change gradually, likely, is that we will realize what I will usually call the deeper heart or the true heart. And people sometimes ask in instincts courses, is there a fourth instinct? And more often than not, the fourth instinct that they're looking for is a spiritual instinct. And from where I stand, instincts are gut-related natural phenomena that will be there in animals and humans alike. Not all animals and all instincts, but they will be there. That they are evolved in biology. And I would say, with that definition, no, there is no spiritual instinct. But if by instinct we don't mean that, but we mean something that inherently is here within us as human beings, yes, there is a spiritual instinct, but it's not an instinct, it's the deeper heart. The deeper heart is this instinct. And if we study the instincts, we can see how the sexual instinct might feed into that, but that's not for this seminar. But so we're not only animals, we're animals. Human beings are very much animals, we can see that, but we're something else too. And so are the animals, by the way, but they're not aware of it in the way we are. So that's what makes the difference. So as human beings, our presence on Earth, we could say, is quite inextricably linked to our heart. And we can hear this in old teachings, and we hear that this is the inner growth and it's the way of the heart. And when people say that, and people have been saying that for ages, And they don't talk about the heart center. They don't talk about emotions. They don't talk about this is the self-image way, but this is a kind of deeper aspect of the heart. Yeah, it's like the fourth station. It's like there were four centers actually when we sort of integrated the gut and the heart and the head. And we can sort of come back to this place where we can sit with stuff. We can stay with our experience. We can experience this yes, or this welcome to everything. And to do that, the deeper heart is required. It's like a longing for truth. It's a longing for realness. It's a longing for, this. Yeah, truth. I think it's a very good word. And for the ego, the heart will mean like the everyday heart center stuff, which is like image and reactivity and emoting, which emoting can include suppressing emotions, interestingly, because I cry about this, but I don't look at that. So we use all the centers to escape. And from the ego's point of view, the heart does not look very enlightened or special, because yes and welcome and total forgiveness, it just spells wimp. But that's not the same. It's not quite the same as this aspect of the deeper heart. And something that we will possibly stumble across when we start looking into this, loving yourself, loving others, what is this? We might run into two problems that are called because of and in spite of, which is when we try and qualify and put conditions on our self-love, because self-love is definitely going to be an aspect of what goes into this deeper heart aspect. And when I think I love myself because, and then I it's like, why do I love my husband? I love him because it's the same thing. We have reasons. And it's like, this love, this deeper heart thing is not about a list of reasons. The list of reasons is the ego trying to do essence. But there is a love for myself, or, for anything else, that can just be there, that doesn't have a because. So when the because comes in there, it's sort of a little flag saying, this is the ego again. And we feel that I love myself in spite of. And it doesn't take a lot of digging to see that this is judgment disguised as acceptance. That we've already decided that I wouldn't possibly be able to love myself because of this, but I love myself in spite of it. So that's another interesting way to see how we might try and qualify something from the ego's perspective. And we might have, I love myself extra much right now as this shit is happening to me. And that's love made into a currency. And so we can just notice if we find that we try to sort of qualify for love or qualify for acceptance or inclusion or whatever it is. And the sum of practice would be to very, very gently look into how this is for me. Do I set up conditions for when I'm worthy of love? And what does this look like? And if the answer is an immediate no, I don't do that, I know I'm worthy of love no matter what, then I just invite you to take a little closer look, really sitting with it for a bit, because doing this is profoundly human. We've experienced so much conditioned love that that's how we tend to believe it works. To a great extent, it is how it works in the physical world. So it's likely to be there. And if we find such conditions and qualifications, we can just notice. We don't need to do anything of them. We don't need to get rid of them. We can't necessarily. We can just be with them. We can notice them without judgment, and that will allow them to slowly fall away of their own accord. We can just be curious whether we have overqualified for our own love or other people's, by the way. But so having toward the centers, as it were, having, found this ground, having access to our emotions and our self-image, having clarity, knowing our thought patterns, having learned to be present and just still, and then having connection to this deeper heart. That means we can actually go do the deep work. Before this, we can think about depth, but we can't go there. It's not really possible for us to go there. And examples of some Enneagram aspects that aren't really explorable prior to this would be like the passions, or Russ Hudson's heart wounds, the virtues. The virtues would be a direct result, I think, of this connection. The holy ideas, don't even get me started. I mean, this is stuff that gets to be, we can read about it and we can learn about it and we can sort of memorize them, but to explore these experientially, unless there's access to this deeper heart, they'll just be theories and, abstract ideas. So really exploring them will possibly be about feeling painful loss, and quite possibly, feeling even more painful thoughts about this. Like, I lack this, so I must be a bad person. It's like, we can believe that for so long, despite having done therapy, despite understanding that this is not the case, there is still a belief that says, I mustn't want or need or think this. This is not good. I should be X. All these things that we have, ideas that we were taught by society or our parents possibly. And here we absolutely need this deeper heart. It will help us to stay with the experience. It will help us to not judge, because this aspect of the heart is the one that does not divide, does not assign blame, not because it excuses or condones bad behavior. It's just not very interested in judging one from the other. It's more interested in the truth of experience. It's less interested in analysis and evaluation. So we might see how right and wrong, they sort of quite quickly become a bit obsolete here, because that's not really the focus. And so another thing that this deeper heart does is it lets us know that we're being held. It offers us true rest, or in other words, actually, love bears all things, believes in all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I actually went online and I looked for Paul's first letter to the Corinthians to find this, and I found various translations, and I didn't know which ones which ones were more used or common in the English ones. So, and I found one that says about love: it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. I thought that was very for this deeper heart purpose, it was very well put. And to the ego, this is a koan. This is how, koan, the one-hand clap, how does that sound? This is equally absurd. How can I be loved absolutely when I'm me? When I have these urges, when I have these thoughts, when I don't like this person? I have all kinds of disqualifying traits, possibly. So sitting with this question, or this idea of this absolute and non-dual, sort of not with a love without an opposite, sitting with that is I would say deep meditation. And so the sum up practice would be doing that, I think, for this bit. And I don't know, we have a little bit of time left. I don't know if there are questions, if we should have a Q&A. The alternative would be to just have a little meditation with this deeper heart. I don't know how to.
Well, I have a question, Cicci.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I just want to, you've spoken a lot about, the difference between, we have these concepts, in the head center where we're thinking about them and we're reading about them, but it's fundamentally different to really experiencing them. So, I understand the definition of the passion, but how do I experience that? So in terms of me developing the capacity to truly have these experiences, what are you recommending? Is it just a case of awareness, the spontaneous as opposed to scheduled, development practices? Is it like, what's the best way for me to pursue the avenue of having the experience so that I'm not just approaching the Enneagram intellectually?
Since we're in this particular presentation or talk, I can say my recommendation is doing the sum up practices that I've been mentioning, sort of that would sort of capture what I've tried to describe or speak about. I think those will go a long way. I think all of those would also be translated to what you just called awareness. It's just that when I say awareness, some people believe that I mean knowing about it, being aware that it's there but that's not what I mean with awareness. With awareness, I mean being aware of what it is that is here when it's here and experiencing it. Yes. And I suppose that's what and whether we want to do this in like scheduled way or we want to do it on the fly, that would be, I think if we're into this kind of stuff, we want to do both. Yeah. Because we want to see to it that we have the scheduled way, and it doesn't have to be again at this time this week or whatever, but we need to make space for it consciously. And also, I think if we do that, and in these sessions, we don't only sort of, as I say, we don't only do the 3 work, the 8 work, whatever, but we actually see what comes out and we work from there, then it will seep out into our everyday life too, and it will be spontaneous work as well. So I don't think one's better than the other. I just think we possibly, I mean, that's a good way to use our ambitious ego that wants to get stuff done. It's like, hooray, it's a very good way. Again, we need to have the ego on board. We can't keep fighting the prison guards because that won't get us the key to get out of the prison. So, yeah. And then I suppose you could find that I habitually disregard this bit because it's not really comfortable and I don't really like going there. That would be possibly one of the things that would require more space in these sessions. And what that would be for you, I can't say, but I could have a guess since I know you're 3. But otherwise, yeah. So does that answer?
Yeah. Don has a question too.
Yeah.
I tried some diamond approach inquiry last year, a few sessions, and I'm just wondering, I mean, some stuff is group stuff and some is your own inquiry, just sitting with things. Would you say this is related to inquiry kinds of processes or not necessarily?
Inquiry would definitely be a way of working with this. Depending on my inclination, I wouldn't do only that because it's easy to like paint myself into little corners or stay within what I believe is the whole, but it's not the whole because so I would do other things too. But definitely sitting, I would many times I think what people refer to when they say inquiry, if it's the self-inquiry kind of thing, it's what I call sitting with things. So it's the same. It's like allowing something to hold something in your experience and being still with it, basically. Is that what you're referring to as inquiry?
I think it is that, but I also sense there's some methods of questions to ask, or
But
there's a lot of felt sense things, but I think it's things could help that.
Yeah, and I think we will be drawn to the modalities that sort of fit our possible overindulgence in one center, and that's great. Don't not use them. But maybe if we notice that I habitually avoid anything that makes me cry because I have actual feelings here and now, then we might want to sort of try and implement some stuff that would help that bit. Or I like doing this thing with the concepts and even deep reflection. It's not that it's not useful, but I might neglect standing on my feet and feeling the ground beneath me. So I need to put that in as well. So I think that the important bit would be to nourish all of them, all of the centers.
Does anybody else have a question? All right.
Bye.
So thank you so much, Cicci, for a wonderful, deep learning and for your generosity and sharing and for the valuable exercise. It's been truly wonderful. So deeply appreciated. And I will be sending out some information on Cici's new book called?
It's called The Enneagram Way. And it's actually our beloved Ingrid that came up with the name. So
Okay, wonderful.
And also you'll get the link and you'll send it out with the rest of the.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. And in a nutshell, the book is on the topic of what we've been discussing, how to.
Yeah.
It's a workbook, as I understand.
Sorry?
It's a workbook, is it?
Depends on your definition of workbook. It's the first book ever that I've written that doesn't have exercises in it.
Okay.
And I think Ingrid's quote on the cover is the reason why, because the whole thing is the exercise.
Right.
But it's not. So it's actually a workbook, but it's not. It doesn't have the format of exercises.
Okay, great. Sounds wonderful. Cicci, thank you. And thanks everybody for being with us today. What a joy. All the best. Love you madly. Adios, amigos.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
I didn't know if you wanted to stay, so I stayed. Oh.
I'm on mute. No, I've just somebody put their email in the chat saying they want to join the email group. So I'm just scrounging through that to find it quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Cicci. That was great.
I hope so. My mouth is dry and I need to go.
But what an amazing ability you have just to speak without problem. You obviously been at this for a long time and you're deeply connected to your message and to
I am. I just, yeah.
trying to say.
And
Let me check the recording.